Bueno, la idea de este panel era que se hiciera una conversación, más que un debate, una conversación sobre el objetivismo y el conservadurismo, no desde el punto de vista económico, sino más que nada desde el punto de vista moral y epistemológico. Así que la idea es comparar objetivismo, conservadurismo, ver si hay algunas similitudes, cuáles son las diferencias y dónde radican las mayores diferencias. Así que del lado de los objetivistas, ya los han conocido durante estos días, lo tenemos a Yaron Brook y a Onkar Ghate, así que un aplauso para ellos. Del lado que hemos apodado hoy, conservadores, después dirán ustedes si se sienten así o no. Tampoco necesitan mucha presentación porque todos los conocemos, el señor Gabriel Zanotti y Gustavo Hasperué.
Trajeron hinchadas.
Ambos en filosofía, ¿no? Sí, los dos destacados filósofos. Y lo tenemos a Eduardo Marty haciendo de moderador, así que have fun.
Hello, yes, it works. Well, Spanish and English will be mixing languages, so you can speak both. We have an excellent translator. I think she deserves an applause, right? Good job. So feel free to speak in any language. Not Latin, please, but just behave yourselves, don't throw tomatoes to each other, and be nice. And let's discuss if there is any chance for us to be friends and any compatible area or not. And still we can respect each other and just follow our own roads. So I will start with Yaron. And if you can help me, Yaron, telling me a little bit about what Ayn Rand thought about conservatives and what were her main arguments against conservatism.
I mean, Ayn Rand, first, she was talking in the context of U.S. conservatives, so, I don't know exactly how similar and different they are, so, she was very much in the context of, I'd say, the William F. Buckley and the way the conservative movement evolved during the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s in the United States. And she viewed conservatism basically as a bankrupt set of ideas. It was not clear what they were trying to conserve, that by that point it seemed like they were trying to conserve the welfare state of the previous generation, that what they were trying to conserve was constantly moving. But her main critique was in their attempt to defend capitalism, to defend freedom, on the basis of religion, and on the basis, so on the basis of religion primarily, and then the fact that they, as a consequence, compromised constantly with the enemies of capitalism, and never really defended capitalism as a complete and full system. She viewed, she thought that the idea that one needed to defend capitalism on the basis of faith was a weakness, because if something's true, one should be able to demonstrate it through reason and not rely on the issue of faith and in a sense, an argument from authority, an argument from the authority of an ancient book or of one's interpretation of God, in order to defend capitalism. She also thought the particular defenses. So one of her big critiques, somebody asked earlier, I think, about what her critiques of Hayek was, and this would be one of them. One of her critiques against conservatives, and Hayek falls into this, is the critique that many conservatives defend capitalism on the basis of human depravity. So the idea is, well, we can't have somebody managing the economy because they're just a human being, and human beings are flawed, and human beings are actually sinful and bad, and so we need freedom because the central planner will be a bad guy, right? which is a caricature, a simplification of kind of even Hayek's view, which is, if only we had somebody smart enough to do the calculation, we could have central planning, but we can't have somebody smart enough to do calculation, so we don't have central planning. Her view was completely different. Her view was, you can't have central planning because nobody can decide my values for me. That is, nobody can know my values. Nobody can know what's good for me other than me. That is, the idea that a central planner, even if they had full knowledge of everything, would know what is right for me in a concrete situation in the marketplace is just absolutely wrong and impossible. So it's not a question of calculation. It's not a question of sophistication. It's not a question of how much reason that person has, how much intellectual supercomputing power they have. It's more a question of where the values reside and who gets to decide. Is a value unless you decide that it's a value, right? So she was very critical of the idea that conservatives often engage in, which is the idea that we're just not good enough. We're just not good enough for socialism, so we need capitalism because, hey, we're all flawed. And she thought that fed right into the social. I'm actually reading a book right now called The Socialist Manifesto. Why I'm reading it, I don't, I'm debating the guy who wrote it, so I have to read the book. And one of his arguments is, now that we have artificial intelligence, we can solve the calculation problem. We have the computing power, so what's the problem? Central planning can work. And I think conservatives have opened that door up, and libertarians have opened that door up to that argument because of the way they presented it. So that's some of her critique. I mean, she obviously criticized religion. She criticized that defense, and she was very critical of just the abandonment of real free market by the conservative movement. And you can see that in America today. Conservatives today are statists. One other thing, and that is, of course, on the social issues. Rand was for freedom. And she didn't differentiate between freedom in the spiritual realm and freedom in the material realm, freedom in the social realm or freedom in the economic realm. She said that because she said the left wants to control our boardrooms and the conservatives want to control our bedrooms. And she found both equally offensive, both the left and the right offensive. Anybody who wanted to control my life, or our lives, would be equally offensive. She quite opposed to the conservatives.
Thank you, Yaron. So let's come to this side. Mr. Gabriel Zanotti is a good friend. He's an expert in Ludwig von Mises, and he knows very well that economic calculation is impossible under socialism. He's an expert in that subject, but at the same time, he's a man of faith. So my question would be just if you could orient, you could comment on Yaron's arguments, but also if you could say something about, is faith compatible with reason?
Well,
you can argue in Spanish or English.
Okay, I will practice my English, and if I cannot make it, I'm going to talk in Klingon. Okay, so, well, the first thing I want to say is that I'm not a conservative. I don't consider myself a conservative. I'm a classical liberal or a libertarian who happens to be a Catholic. Okay? Yes, louder, I understand. Okay. Yes. So I said that I am a classical mindfulness.
No, it's not working. Just put it closer. Ayúdalo, Gustavo.
I know. I don't
My
know
goodness.
how to do.
Now it's okay?
Lo habrás doblado. A ver ahí. Dale.
The expert is coming.
Ahí viene.
El expert.
They are going to put a pen drive in my brain.
No sé por qué se sale.
It's because of me.
Yes.
Because of me, because these
No doubt.
things happens to me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I said that I'm a classical liberal who happens to be a Catholic. So I have natural reasons to be a classical liberal. And so, in addition, I'm sure that you all know that my background is St. Thomas Aquinas. So he established very well the difference between natural reasons and reasons of faith. And so, in a way, even when I consider that classical liberalism is originated in the Judeo-Christian tradition, even though I don't need my faith in order to defend classical liberalism. So, because in very, very philosophical terms, I am distinguishing with St. Thomas Aquinas between the first cause and the second cause. All the discussions about social issues are second cause discussions, that is natural causes. So I don't think that there is a problem between reason and faith, because in St. Thomas Aquinas there is not a problem between both of them, because in St. Thomas Aquinas you have to have reasons for your faith. That's the point. So well, having said that, I don't see that there is a problem.
Good. So let's go to Onkar now, and I'm asking you, regarding what Yaron said and Mr. Zanotti answer, if we could say that is because according to what I understand, is in order for you to be a religious man, you need to be kind of authoritarian. You need to obey orders. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think if you're really distinguishing faith and reason, and if faith has there's an independent, the two are independent from one another. If what you're saying is you have reason for your faith, if you really do have reasons for it, then it's reason everywhere. But if faith, what it means is that you have convictions, ideas, beliefs that you cannot defend in the end with facts, evidence, reasoning. You can view this as, and it sometimes is viewed as it supplements reason and so on, but it's not, it's independent from reason. And I think the whole scholastic tradition of which Aquinas is a part, in the end is taking certain things as their revealed starting points, and then you reason down from there. So there is a lot of reasoning involved, but at root, or at the top, but I mean, I'm flowing down, but you can also flow up. At the root is things accepted on faith. And that is the, to link that to authoritarianism is to say I'm accepting things for which I don't have any reason.
Would you mention those starting points?
Well, there can be a lot. I actually think God is a starting point in it. So there are arguments for the existence of God. I think this is true of Aquinas. I think this is true of almost every religious person. The reason he believes in God is not these arguments. These arguments are given after the fact. They're often given to try to justify your belief that you've arrived at for other reasons to other people, and I'm going to give you guys an argument and so on. But I don't think there are actually religious figures that it's, I wasn't religious and then I got these arguments and now I'm religious. I just don't think that's how it works. So at root, it's accepted for non-rational reasons. You might then think, oh, there's reasons in support of it and so on. But that's not the essence of the position. And I think in the end, what it amounts to, if you're saying I can accept things without evidence or without reason, you're willing to obey. The essence of obedience is you're going to take someone's say-so as that's good enough for me. And it doesn't really matter if it's somebody else's say-so or your own say-so. That is, I just for some reason believe in God and so on, and that's good enough for me. That should never be good enough for anybody, I think so. And that's the link to, if you're willing to do that and you're willing to say that's a legitimate position, what you're legitimizing is that people can go by authorities, that they can go when they don't have actual reasons for it.
Thank you, Onkar. Gustavo, it's your turn.
Okay.
And
I'm not going to practice my English just only by hearing. So I apologize.
Hablas,
Voy a hablar en
hablas en
español.
español,
Sí, en castellano,
perfecto.
sí.
Ok, entonces te hago la
eh,
pregunta en español primero y después elaborar si querés, ¿querés seguir?
Sí, puedes preguntar en inglés,
Por
no hay
su-
problema.
Bueno.
Así, como quieras.
Ok, pregunto en español, así hacemos trabajar a la traductora, que se gane el pan. La pregunta es, ¿podés comentar un poquito sobre esto de religión y autoritarismo? La idea del, por ejemplo, el pecado original, aquí lo mencionamos durante este congreso un par de veces. La idea de realmente sos culpable aún siendo un chico, no habiendo tomado ninguna decisión. Esta idea de, por el solo hecho de haber nacido o buscar conocimiento, ¿querés hacer algún comentario sobre esto de religión y autoritarismo?
Sí.
La idea de aceptar cosas por imposición o porque lo dice un libro.
Sí, quizá también algún comentario sobre lo que decía al principio Yaron, ¿no? Yo coincido con Gabriel en que yo no me definiría como un conservador, salvo que a veces la palabra conservador está asociada a ciertos valores a los cuales uno puede adherir incluso razonablemente, ¿no es cierto? Ciertas ideas morales o ideas sobre, digamos, el valor de la familia o cosas por el estilo, o ciertas tradiciones. Creo que lo fundamental, y yendo también al punto del autoritarismo, en el contexto de las relaciones sociales, lo más importante me parece que tiene que ver con la justificación del uso de la fuerza, ¿no? Entonces, usar la palabra autoritarismo para señalar a alguien que tal vez sostiene una postura que no me parece totalmente justificada desde el punto de vista racional, me parece que puede llevar a confundir, porque autoritarismo normalmente lo utilizamos para aquel que se cree justificado a imponer a otros un punto de vista, una conducta o un modo de vida, apelando a la fuerza, incluso apelando a la fuerza organizada que es el Estado. Así que digo, ahí podría haber, entiendo, creo que el argumento de Onkar, como que bueno, uno está aceptando alguna idea sin poderla justificar racionalmente y eso es basarse en el principio de la obediencia y eso es autoritarismo. En todo caso sería una especie de autoritario o alguien que quiere destruirse a sí mismo en su calidad de ser racional, pero no es lo que habitualmente llamamos autoritario, ¿no? Que es alguien que, como cree que tiene una verdad y cree que esa verdad merece ser impuesta, está justificado para hacerlo. Desde ese punto de vista, bueno, los dos pertenecemos a la tradición católica, ¿no es cierto? Y más allá de cuestiones históricas donde podemos criticar la conducta de los cristianos, de los católicos, incluso de autoridades de la Iglesia, pero podemos criticarlos con el Evangelio en la mano, digamos, por no haber sido coherentes, está muy claro que el punto de partida de la fe católica, que el punto de partida del catolicismo, que es la fe, es un acto libre o no es nada. Entonces, mal puede ser yo no digo que no existan casos, pero mi opinión, mal puede ser uno un creyente autoritario cuando una característica esencial de la fe religiosa es la libertad. No se puede imponer la fe. Esto ya, como lo decía Locke, ¿no es cierto?, en su carta sobre la tolerancia. Con respecto a lo que comentabas del pecado original y lo que decía Onkar sobre la idea de Dios, que en realidad uno lo acepta por la fe y todos los demás son argumentos para justificar lo que ya creí, yo acá tengo una diferencia, ¿no? En primer lugar, sobre ese tema. Yo distingo cuestiones o verdades que efectivamente aceptamos los cristianos porque las consideramos reveladas. Se pueden reír tranquilamente. You can laugh, no problem. Y otras que efectivamente tienen relación con la religión, como esta de la existencia de Dios o cierta dimensión inmaterial en la naturaleza humana, que por otra parte ya han sido vistas por filósofos a su modo, incluso el propio Aristóteles, ¿no es cierto? Y los argumentos de Aristóteles pueden ser buenos o malos, pero son argumentos racionales, el del famoso el primer motor y demás. Aristóteles ciertamente no se le puede acusar de cristiano, ¿cierto? Que quería ya, que creía en un Dios que después justificaba. Y si esa fuera la cosa, ese Dios de Aristóteles no tiene mucho que ver con la mitología griega, con lo cual parecería ver en él una cuestión auténticamente racional. Que de nuevo, si uno dice que está equivocado es porque apela a razones que analizan las razones que él da. Y por lo tanto estamos en el terreno de la discusión racional y no parecería que uno pueda resolver esa discusión diciendo que se trata de cuestiones de fe. Lo que se conoce como pecado original, como tantas otras cosas de la fe cristiana, yo de todas maneras quiero comentar, quizá para los que no están mucho en el tema, que son temas de muchísima discusión entre teólogos, o quizá lo eran. Hoy tenemos muchos teólogos preocupados por el medio ambiente y y los males del capitalismo. Quizás si estuviéramos en el siglo XVIII, esta es una conversación típica del siglo XVIII y XIX, cuando se acusaba al cristianismo y a la iglesia de irracional, y ahí los teólogos estaban ahí, haciendo su trabajo, bien o mal. Hoy están en otra cosa y lamentablemente, tengo que venir yo, que no soy un especialista, a comentar algo sobre esto. Lo que voy a decir es simplemente esto. Todas las cosas que nos parecen chocantes o irracionales en algunas verdades o dogmas cristianos, no es que le pasa eso a los no cristianos, le pasa a cualquier cristiano que piensa. Por eso están los debates en teología. ¿Qué puede significar esto del pecado original? ¿Quiere decir que nace alguien que no tiene ni siquiera conciencia de haber tomado ninguna decisión y es culpable, como aquel criminal que con premeditación y alevosía mató a otra persona? Por supuesto que no. Entonces, quizá la palabra ahí, pecado, es la que genera, con razón, para mucha gente cierto escándalo. ¿Cómo le voy a echar la culpa a alguien de algo que no hizo? Y por lo tanto, sería muy largo, porque hay una especie de interpretación canónica, pero hay otras interpretaciones de distintos teólogos que entienden analógicamente esto de pecado. No es ninguna falta, digamos así, personal, ni señalamos con el dedo como un pecador a esa persona. Normalmente se lo asocia a una experiencia...
Para ir concluyendo así.
Claro, se lo asocia a una experiencia que todos tenemos, sin necesidad de apelar al pecado original, que es esta, llamémosle así, dificultad de hacer lo que nos conviene, ¿no? Es decir, muchas veces el bien que humanamente nos conviene no es lo que más fácilmente nos sale, hay una cierta, digamos así, debilidad en nuestras condiciones. No es fácil conocer la verdad, por eso se hacen estas conferencias, para pensar a ver quién tiene razón. Y tampoco es fácil hacer el bien en el sentido de dar con el mejor tipo de vida para mí. Bueno, a esa especie de debilidad se la interpreta en la tradición cristiana con lo que se llama pecado original.
Agilizar la discusión, creo que igual llegamos a las conclusiones. So, let's go back to you, Yaron, and if you could comment on this difficulty of just putting together the idea of faith and acceptance, the idea of acceptance conclusions without evidence. That's one point. And the second one would be this idea of the original sin and the link with altruism also, if you could put those three subjects together. Altruism, original sin, and the acceptance of knowledge without evidence.
If he's not a theologian, I certainly am not a theologian, so I don't know.
Do your best.
I'll do my best. So, yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what Onkar said earlier. That is, I don't think reason and faith are compatible, because I think that the very nature of faith is that it's not based on reason. That's what the concept means. If it was based on reason, then it's just reason. Then it's just fact. The fact that we have two different concepts, two different ideas here, things based on reason, things based on faith, indicates that the things based on faith, as I think you said it, there's revelation. And revelation, by definition, is not something that comes from reality. It's something that comes from a different dimension, that we supposedly experience some truth in some other way. And that, I think, connects to the authoritarianism. That is, it's problematic, because some people might say, well, it was revealed to me, but it wasn't to me. So, and this is where I think a lot of times the imposition happens, the force happens. Well, but if this person the real truth was revealed to them and everybody else it wasn't, then often they have the confidence and the authority to impose that truth because it was revealed. That's the pattern of religion, forever. And I know a lot more about Judaism. You can ask me about that than I do about Catholicism. So, and I know a lot more about the Old Testament than I do about the New Testament. And the Old Testament, of course, is full of this. It's full of revealed truth imposed on people. It's full of the use of violence in order to impose truth on people or to get rid of people, kill people who don't agree with the revealed truth to Moses or to whoever. And it's an incredibly, if you haven't read the Old Testament, it's an unbelievably violent book. And God is unbelievably violent in the Old Testament. And there's no free speech, and there's no freedom of religion, and there's none of these concepts in the Old Testament. So I think there is a real issue with faith that it brings about a moral and epistemological potential authoritarianism. Whether it's manifest, whether anybody, I'm not saying everybody of faith believes in authoritarianism, but I'm saying that faith conditions man's mind to accept authority, because you're already conditioned to accept the book, the revealed truth. Now it's just a question of are there other things you're willing to accept, and I think a religious society is more susceptible to authoritarianism than a non-religious society because of that, because it's a certain conditioning of the mind. And I can give examples of moral authoritarianism from the Old Testament. Abraham being willing to kill his son is probably the best and the most famous and the most obvious. He's a hero for all three religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Why? Because he's a man of faith. Because he doesn't ask God why. Because he doesn't challenge God. He doesn't ask for explanation. He doesn't ask for a reason. He goes and does it. Now God stops him because God has to be the good guy in the end, but he does it. He accepts it on authority. And that is a very dangerous place to be morally, when you're willing to put some authority above you that dictates how you should live your life, to the point of being willing to kill your own child, which I can't think of a more horrible thing to be asked to do. So I can't remember the rest of the question. So
but we can go into Onkar, and we go back to you both, and about this idea of the original sin, and also on altruism. This idea we enter into ethics, and the idea in general is very conservative and a little bit religious too. The idea of just you need to give up your goods to enter heavens, right? And you need to be a good fellow towards your fellow men.
I think there's a deep connection, and I think the way that it's another link to the authoritarianism. You can control people by guilt. It's one of the worst situations to be in, to feel that I've done something wrong that I have to atone for. And when you've earned guilt, when you have actually done something wrong, it is, if you're a moral person, it's I've done something wrong, I've got to make amends for this, I've got to correct, if I've hurt someone else, I've got to restore them. I can't restore them whole, but whatever I can do, if you're a moral person, that you take that really seriously. And you're in a position where you feel like I don't deserve my situation because I've done something wrong, and if I don't make amends for it, I'm a sort of fraud. To use unearned guilt, to make someone feel guilty for something that they haven't done, makes them feel small, insignificant, I'm unworthy, I don't deserve my own life and happiness. And this is the connection to altruism. To really sell the idea that you're nothing, your neighbor and your neighbors are everything, and your life doesn't count, your happiness doesn't count, you should engage in self-sacrifice for other people. For a person who really thinks well of himself and has self-esteem, and it's go to hell if somebody tells you that. And so Ayn Rand thought you have to break people's self-esteem in order to really push altruism. And to break self-esteem, the best, most devious way to do it is to make someone feel guilty for something they should not feel guilty for. And to say you're a sinner, And so original sin comes in here. You're born a sinner. Yeah, no, what did I do? No, you didn't do anything. You've inherited sin from Adam and so, but you're a sinner. You're corrupt. Your individual life doesn't matter. You need to atone for your very existence. And if you remember, we watched the video of Ayn Rand, that she really emphasized that altruism says you have to keep earning your moral justification by serving others, becoming the servant of others. And why do you have to earn that? Because you're guilty for being you, for being and pursuing your own life. And original sin really inculcates that view. And I think when you look through the history of Christianity in the West, you really see this. And when you see in the Enlightenment, so part of what the Enlightenment, there's many religious people in the Enlightenment, but part of what they're trying to do is make God more rational. You say in the Old Testament, he's an SOB, I think. To make him more moral and more rational. And one of the things that happens is they reinterpret original sin. So if you read Locke, who's still a Christian, on the reasonableness of Christianity, it starts off with a discussion of original sin. And his view is God could not be so monstrous and irrational as to make it that you inherit sin. So it can't mean that you're morally guilty, a baby born, hasn't done anything, is completely innocent, but somehow is morally guilty. That's monstrous. And it's monstrous, so now God is subordinate to reason. That this couldn't be God, because God's supposed to be rational, and this is irrational. And you're getting a religious view, and it's part of why religion disappears. You're getting a religious view that says it's completely subordinate to reason. And the end point of that is you don't really need religion and you don't need God. But so Locke's view is, what does original sin mean? Because I have to, and this happens all the time in Christianity, I think. I've got to reinterpret this. We're supposed to be more rational, so I have to reinterpret this in a rational way that still somehow preserves something about Christianity. So what Locke says is, well, what it means is what we inherited is that we're mortal. So in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve lived forever. Now one of us die, and you inherit that from your parents. You're a living thing, and they can die, and you can die. That's what original sin means. That's such a reinterpretation of what if you read St. Augustine, of what it means. That the essence of the view is that you're guilty without having done anything, and that's how you control people.
Thank you. So now, Gabriel, you have a lot of things to say probably, but let me ask you to just stop. One question, are you a sinner? The second one is, let me ask you that, and the second one is, tell me your idea of altruism, if it is right or wrong, and how do you put together capitalism and altruism? How do you manage yourself to put those concepts together?
Okay, first of all, yes, I am a sinner, but let me not give any example, okay? And the second one is that for me, altruism is just the story of the Samaritan, okay?
Could you tell us that story?
Yes, it's just an example of seeing somebody suffering and just help him. And this is not against reason or anything. That is perfectly compatible with reason to help somebody who is suffering, because this is something that at the same time is a valuable thing to do for you. So
that concept of comte, of sacrificing yourself.
Well, perhaps we are a clash of paradigms, because perhaps both groups are attached to certain terminology. Okay, so the meaning of sacrifice, altruism, egoism, and these kind of things, the meaning is not just one. For a Catholic, altruism perhaps is not the best word. Caritas is just helping all people to be better than they are, or helping when they are suffering, or teaching when they don't know anything, this kind of thing. This is altruism. Caritas. I agree with Warren Orban from Guatemala when he taught me that Comte has used the word altruism. In a way, I disagree, of course. So we have a problem of terminology here. I don't think I am killing myself when I am helping anybody. Okay, so that's the first things, and the first thing I want to say. Perhaps you asked me about the main reason I can make a compatibility between free market, classical liberalism, and faith.
Right.
Well, I have a Christian non-aggression principle. My Christian non-aggression principle is that all of you are God's property. That is, you are going to be a little surprised, but for me, all of you, me included, are property of God. So that's the reason I cannot impose on you anything. That's the reason of the non-aggression principle. You are not my property because you are God's property. So that's the reason I have to engage with you in a free contract in order and that's the reason why I have to agree with a free society, because I cannot impose anything to anybody, because I am, if I do it, if I did it, I am against God's property. Okay? Well, I know you are going to surprise, but I really think like that. Okay? I really think like a Christian that I have to respect you, because not only because who are you, but in addition, because God is your creator, so I have no right to impose anything for anybody, okay? And that's the relation between my faith and a free society. And if you allow me, and if I have a little free time,
go ahead.
The famous thing about faith and reason, what does it mean that we have reasons for faith? Well, those are not mathematical reasons, of course. It's just saying that faith is reasonable. And the first thing that many Christian theologians did in order to demonstrate that faith is reasonable is to demonstrate that faith is not against the contradiction principle. And that's the principal apologetic work of the first Christian theologians. So, for instance, to talk about Trinity and incarnation and this kind of thing is not to demonstrate that those are true in a mathematical way, just demonstrate that those truths or those things are not against the contradiction principle. So that's one of the reasons to have faith.
What would be the justification for not being contradictory arguments?
That's the dialogue that all the Christian theologians made between the Christian faith and the Greek philosophy. So when many theologians thought about the meaning of things, columns, like nature and person and these kind of things, they made very good arguments in order to demonstrate that, for instance, we have God is just one in three persons, but you have to think about the meaning of nature and person. Well, that and of course the theologian that made it in the best way was Saint Thomas Aquinas. So when I think that God talks to me, not in a personal way, when I think that He had already talked to me, well, I agree that you may think that this is an illusion. Freud thought that was an illusion, but I never saw God. I never talked to Him really, personally, in person. I just think that I couldn't be here if He hadn't created me. And that's the reason why I think the revelation is truth. In addition, if I have a little more time,
No, because I will go back to you, but I will ask you, Mr. Hasperué, God as the premier cause, the first cause, who created God?
Well,
and if you tell me that God has always been here,
yes.
and how do you answer the argument that the universe has always been here?
Yes, yes. Sí. Digamos, el tema justamente de una primera causa y quién la creó es como, no es el mismo. Yo creo que el argumento de Aristóteles del primer motor tiene algún problema, pero justamente cuando Aristóteles habla de un primer motor inmóvil es que entiende que para explicar las cosas todas que son móviles hace falta algo distinto. Con lo cual, para explicar la existencia de cosas que son metafísicamente contingentes, hace falta algo de otra naturaleza, que obviamente no podemos imaginar y que solamente de modo analógico podemos decir es, pero no como son las demás cosas. Con lo cual, preguntar por quién creó a Dios es hacer de Dios una parte del todo de las cosas contingentes. Pero si me permitís, quisiera...
Meterle más.
Sí, con
pero
el
hagamos
tema...
las más cortas.
Sí, con el tema... con el tema del cristianismo y la lógica y la razón, creo que tal vez en términos lógicos se podría entender así, ¿no? La historia del cristianismo, lo que se llama lo revelado, sería algo así como un mundo posible. Y lo que decía Gabriel de la tarea de los teólogos de mostrar la no contradicción entre aquellas verdades que son reveladas, sobre todo sobre Dios y sobre cosas que tienen que ver con la religión. Tiene que quedar claro que no tenemos ninguna teoría económica revelada, ni cura revelada para el cáncer, ni qué sé yo, y que los cristianos, obviamente, en todas esas materias, lo que hacemos es promover la investigación científica, la experiencia, la razón. No tenemos otros medios para conocer la naturaleza que no sea lo que todos ustedes suponen. Pero ciertas cosas sobre el mundo trascendente y demás, yo diría, desde el punto de vista lógico, son como mundos posibles. Es evidente que no porque algo sea posible ya es verdadero. Y por lo tanto las razones de la fe tienen que ver acerca de por qué creer que lo que fulano dice, y que tal vez sea posible, en el sentido de no contradictorio, no es un círculo cuadrado, tiene que ser así. La fe religiosa tiene también una cierta analogía con lo que llamamos la fe humana, es decir, por algún motivo le creemos a otro algo que nos cuenta. A veces es verificable lo que otro nos cuenta, a veces no, es una experiencia. Y por lo tanto ahí también hay razones para creerle a fulano, sí o no. Bueno, lo que me dice no es un disparate, no me dice que anduvo volando solo por la ciudad de Buenos Aires por sus propios medios. Quien me lo dice es alguien en quien confío, es una persona que no miente, etcétera, etcétera. Ese mismo tipo de cuestiones aparecen al analizar el contenido de la fe religiosa y que obviamente tiene un punto de partida histórico con la existencia, concretamente el cristianismo, con la existencia de Jesucristo. Pero entonces, redondeamos. ¿Con qué querés
una
que
frase
redondee?
más.
¿Con qué querías que redondee lo último?
Ahora vuelvo.
Dale.
Onkar, I will start with you.
Okay.
I would like you to comment on that relationship between altruism and capitalism. Why you explain that today in different conferences? Why they are incompatible? And at the same time, is life an end in itself, or we are here just in transit for heavens? Can we expect to live another life? Because these guys believe that that's possible, and they are preparing themselves to enjoy the other life. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes.
And we just have one,
I hope so.
Yeah.
and it's going to end for us. So give me some hope. Come on.
The hope is you live one good life.
Yes.
And you can, that you have the power to live one good life. No, I don't think there's any such notion as life after death. And indeed, I mean, if you put it like that, it's a contradiction in terms. Death is the cessation of life. So there's no such thing as life after death. Oh, I've got it. Thank you. And the conception that you get in Christianity, but it certainly predates Christianity, of a soul that leaves the body. So what death is is a soul, and you get this in Platonism, which Christianity takes a lot from. It's a soul leaving a body and transcending up to Plato's world of forms, if you're lucky. No, I don't think there's any evidence for that, and that part of what's at issue here actually is when you don't have any evidence, is that a license to believe whatever you want? And if you say, well, it doesn't contradict anything that I know, why can't I believe it? And I think it's a principle of reason that no, you cannot believe anything you want, even if you think, well, I don't know any facts that contradict what I'm projecting or what I'm imagining. You only should accept things. So to believe means to think this is some aspect of reality. If you have some evidence for it, and if you have a little bit of evidence, then you start to think, well, maybe this is a possible aspect of reality. But if you have no evidence for it, you don't entertain that it's possible, maybe this is so, you don't have any position on this, because you have no reason to have any kind of position on it. And so in regard to a soul transcending the body, what our actual evidence is, and I think this is this is already the view in Aristotle, is that we have a mind and we have a consciousness that's different from our body. So it's not a material thing, but it's part of a material thing. It's part of a living organism. You have a mind that it enables you to navigate and move about the world and to see the world and to understand the world. And it's a completely biological faculty in that sense. You're a union and an integrated union of mind and body. They're not two things in conflict, nor are they two independent things that could have a life of their own. And when conscious organisms die, their life goes out of existence, and all their faculties, their faculty of respiration, of blood circulation stops, and their mind stops, and that's the end of it. So we have one life, and it's going to end. And what you should do is make the most of the life that you have, not waste your life pining for some supernatural dimension that you have no evidence for, and you're going to throw away your one life doing that. So I think this is a really important issue to think about, is my life just a dress rehearsal for the true life up in heaven or down in hell, or is it a one life that I have now that I need to live the best possible?
Thank you. Gabriel, what do you plan to do in the other life? What are your plans for that? Tell me a little bit about it.
This is curious. Nobody asked me that before.
Well, there is always a first time.
Very interesting. I think that I'm going to be with God, and that's enough.
Aren't you going to be bored? A little bit of, I don't know.
Oh, no, I'm going to have with him a lot of discussion, pretty discussions, pretty good discussions, yes. But setting aside that joke, I would like to tell you that...
We are just almost finishing, right? Okay.
I would like to tell you that...
last opportunity to speak with you, Gustavo,
Okay.
and you, Yaron, and we go to questions. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I would like to tell you that St. Thomas Aquinas agree with you that our body and our soul are not different. For him, as an Aristotelian, what we call the soul is just the substantial form of the body. So, so we agree. The difference is that he thinks that this substantial form, for a reason I have not the time to explain you right now, but if I had the time, I would do it. Has a very specific characteristic that allows our soul to be with God after life, because we don't believe in a great light or tunnels, or that we are going to come back to solve certain things that we couldn't solve in this life and these kind of movies. We just believe that after this life, God is everything for us. That's all.
Thank you. Don Gustavo,
Bueno.
may I ask you, ¿tenés
Sí.
algo en mente ya? Pero yo
sí,
te quería preguntar algo
bueno,
bien difícil.
Dale, cómo no.
No, como religioso o conservador o con una visión, no poniendo tan conservador o religiosa, pero en general se asocia a los conservadores con restricciones a las libertades personales, especialmente con todo lo que tenga que ver con libertades sexuales, o con orientaciones, o con algo para decir o aportar sobre eso, y después tus comentarios finales.
No, creo que aquí podemos dividir entre las convicciones o estilos de vidas personales y el problema propiamente político, que es si hay algún derecho a imponerle algo a alguien en esa materia, y yo creo que absolutamente no.
Okay.
O sea, la cuestión política es siempre si hay algún derecho a imponerle a otro un estilo de vida, y me parece que no. Ni al revés tampoco, que me impongan a mí un modo de pensar, quiero decir, ¿no? Y por lo tanto hay libertad.
Sobre eso, y en general una conclusión final sobre la posible compatibilidad entre mantener convicciones en materia de religión o de tradiciones y la libertad.
Sí, totalmente. Yo un poco lo que decía Gabriel, es decir, tengo buenas razones y muchas quizá podemos compartirlas acá con nuestros distinguidos visitantes, invitados, para defender una sociedad libre. No veo ninguna incompatibilidad entre la defensa de la sociedad libre y el cristianismo. Diría que mi modo de entender el cristianismo refuerza la convicción por una sociedad libre por la sencilla razón de lo que los cristianos debemos pensar sobre cada ser humano, su dignidad, el valor de su vida, etcétera, etcétera. Con lo cual, soy consciente de que en nombre de la religión a veces se han conculcado las libertades, también a veces se han hecho en nombre de la ciencia o de filosofías materialistas o ateas, como fue el marxismo. De ninguna manera se me ocurriría acusarlos a ustedes que son ateos de querer vulnerar la libertad de nadie, pero sí se ha tratado de defender al ateísmo como lo racional en un esquema que no es la filosofía de ustedes, obviamente, y se han conculcado todo tipo de libertades. Y uno de los blancos, digamos, dirigidos por todo el comunismo real a lo largo de la historia han sido precisamente las personas creyentes, ¿no es cierto?, que mantenían su libertad de decir, mire, yo creo esto y quiero vivir mi vida de esta manera, han sido sistemáticamente masacradas.
Final words.
Sí, lo último. Coincido con lo que decía Onkar, que no simplemente por ser algo posible ya es real. Simplemente quise mostrar que podría ser concebido desde un punto de vista lógico. No es la mejor manera de presentar el cristianismo. Yo considero que el cristianismo es verdadero, es bueno y es bello. Se presta más para presentarlo con poesía que con lógica, pero puede y debe ser analizado lógicamente. Por eso dije que me parece que se puede entender como un mundo posible. De todos modos queda la cuestión de por qué aceptar que eso que es meramente posible desde el punto de vista lógico sea efectivamente verdadero. ¿Por qué dar ese salto? Y es una pregunta a la cual obviamente hay que dar una respuesta racional. Si uno lee el Evangelio, parece que los primeros cristianos creían en Jesucristo por lo que hacía, ¿no? Y luego porque finalmente, después de muerto, ya no estuvo muerto. Pueden reírse también. Pero quiero decir que desde el punto de vista lógico hay una razón, o había razones, no todos los que escucharon a Jesús le creyeron, había razones por las cuales interpretaban que valía la pena creer lo que decía ese señor. No son revelaciones misteriosas que uno escucha en la oscuridad o un libro que cayó y hay que leer. La verdad que es la experiencia humana de escuchar a alguien que habla y eventualmente creer esas cosas, comillas, increíbles que dice por algún motivo, que de nuevo se puede discutir.
Muchas gracias. So, Yaron, your final words and trying to interpret this. Two little things I would like you to argue. One, the relationship between atheism and Marxism, and that second one, that also that idea that during the times of Christ, that some people just saw and watched something happening, and that's the reason why they accepted Christianism, because they had some facts in front of them to believe.
I mean, let me take the second one, because first, Well, I mean, people tell stories all the time. I mean, there's plenty of mythology about people seeing stuff and then reporting on it. If you came to me with a story about somebody who died and then was resurrected, I'd say you're nuts, and I'd walk away. I mean, people see all kinds of stuff, and they tell all kinds of stories all the time. And why should we believe them? Because, you know, and we know from psychology that there are mass effects where lots of people believe they see things, and they, you know, you can't take somebody's word on fact, particularly when that word contradicts everything you know about existence. People don't come back from death. It just doesn't happen. So there's one example, and for some reason we build a whole theology around that one example because a few people saw it, or say they saw it. Sorry, but it's you have to accept faith. You have to accept it on faith, right? I mean,
I agree. People don't. God, yes.
People don't, God does, yes. On the issue of the relationship between atheism and Marxism, I mean, look, atheism is not an ideology. Atheism just says that it's a negation. It's the idea that you don't believe in God. It doesn't say what you do believe in. Onkar mentioned this earlier today. All atheism says is, I don't believe in God. That's it. And then there's a whole array of things in terms of what do you believe in. And I can tell you what Marxists don't believe in. They don't believe in reason, and they don't believe in the individual. And that is consistent with almost every one of the authoritarian regimes that are out there. But there's a sense in which Marxism adopts certain features of Christianity. And I think altruism is the main one. And you know, again, I think modern Christians and modern religious people, Jews as well, you know, have reinterpreted much of, during the Enlightenment, I think there was a lot of reinterpretation of what altruism means, or what specific features of Christianity or Judaism actually meant. I think that's why we have civilization and religion at the same time, because religion was modified to accommodate civilization by the Enlightenment, by reason, by Aquinas and everything that followed Aquinas. But at the heart of Christianity, I believe, is the idea that your purpose in life is to sacrifice for some greater cause. And much of that greater cause is the need of other people. I mean, Jesus, who is the moral ideal, and I know there are different Christian interpretations of this, but just from a simplistic, non-Christian point of view, here's a man who is idealized for dying for other people's sins. I said this earlier today. I think that's unbelievably unjust and wrong to die for somebody else's sin. I don't want to die for your sins. You should die for your sins. I'll die for mine. Right? You should suffer for yours. I'll suffer for mine. But we have created a symbol and a whole mythology around the idea of dying for other people's sins, and how beautiful that is, how amazing that is, how moral that is. And the essence of Christian morality, as I understand it, is the idea of self-sacrifice, is the idea of sacrificing yourself and your values for those who need them. It's not just about stopping and helping somebody in the street. I mean, nobody's against that under the right circumstances. It's much deeper than that. It's much more meaningful than that, as I understand it. It's a moral, what is moral? And I think that in many respects, you know, Marxism takes that and you know, secularizes it, as Augustin Comte did. Augustin Comte secularized, I think, Christian view of ethics, and builds a social system around it. And I think that it does that on the moral level, but I even think it does it on an epistemological level, because Marxism is based on a revelation. There is no reason. I mean, and Marx, if you read Marx, I mean, he doesn't give a reason, and he certainly doesn't explain how for example, how the dictatorship of the proletarian will know what to do. How does it work? And how does the dictatorship turn into this utopian place where we're all free and do whatever we want? He never gives explanations. How do we know what's good for the proletarian? Well, somebody has to get it revealed to them, because there is no fact in the world, as we understand it, of what's good for the proletarian. there's good for me and good for you, but what's good for the whole proletarian? We need the equivalent of a pope. We need equivalent of a leader to get the revelation from the spirit of the proletarian and tell us what it is. So I think there are many similarities between both Marxism and I think ultimately most forms of authoritarianism and Christianity and religion more broadly. I don't think they're secular in a philosophical sense. I think they're secular in a metaphysical sense, but not in an epistemological and moral sense. I think epistemologically and morally, they rely on the same mechanism, which is revelation and the subordination of the individual to the group, which I think is at the core.
Thank you, Yaron. I think that this, vamos a ir enseguida a las preguntas, pero antes me parece que merecen un aplauso. Sí.
Seguimos hasta las 4:10.
Propongo un mecanismo que digan a quién va dirigida la pregunta y le damos una oportunidad, depende si vamos a la derecha o a la izquierda, para que del otro bando uno conteste. Por favor, preguntas cortas.
Esa es la fila
y
para
por
preguntar.
favor, respuestas cortas.
Muy bien.
Ahí tenemos una muchedumbre. Así que no hay repreguntas, cortas y al grano.
Dale.
Go ahead.
Buenas tardes, voy a preguntar en español.
¿A quién?
A cualquiera de ellos dos. Quería saber, yo soy ateo,
Prepárense.
pero creo que es innegable las instituciones y los valores que dejaron las religiones judeocristianas y quería saber cuál es su visión sobre eso.
I think that Onkar, it's your turn.
Cualquiera.
No entendió la pregunta, otra vez.
I didn't quite get the question.
Do it again.
Yeah, sorry.
Quiero saber, ¿sí?, su visión acerca de los valores que trajeron las religiones judeocristianas y los valores y las instituciones que brindaron esas religiones.
Porque decís que son importantes.
Exactamente.
He thinks that they are very important, those institutions.
And do you have an example of just one institution that you think is important?
Not killing another one.
What?
Which one?
¿Cuál?
Not killing another one.
No matar a otro.
Oh, don't murder.
Don't murder.
I shall not
I
murder.
Los 10 mandamientos.
Yeah, so I
toca a vos.
don't have a position. I mean, my position is, I don't think it was Ayn Rand's position, that everything in a particular religious sect. So you can talk about the religion of Christianity, but there's all kinds of different Protestants, Catholics, and under the Protestants there's 10,000 denominations who have different views about it. So my view is not in religion, everything, if you look at it at a concrete level of the content, is wrong. But if what they're telling you to do is take this on faith, it's wrong for that reason. Okay. So that it's wrong to murder the innocent is true. But if you say, look, you have to accept that on faith, there's no reasons for it, and if there's reasons or not, that's besides the point. That is really, really bad to do to a person, to tell them there's no reason for this. So for the things that there are reasons for in a particular content of a particular religion, what you should be doing is giving the reasons for why it's wrong to murder. And if you take the 10 Commandments, they're not all good. And even don't murder, if you just take it like that, as many people do, then they become pacifists, that you can't murder someone who's trying to kill you, if that's your interpretation. But if you take it on faith, because you don't have any reasons for it, so why couldn't that be the interpretation? Why couldn't that be the commandment? Don't murder anyone, even if they're trying to kill you. Why couldn't that be the commandment? And you could say, well, that's not a reasonable commandment, but then you're subjecting it to your rational assessment. And the content of all of morality should be derivable from reason. And then you don't need faith. And so when you look at the history of the West, I think the essence of it is all the good ideas come from Greece and Rome. And what that means is they come from the arguments that were offered by the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, that they had reasons for this. And Christianity takes a lot of that over. And so it can have good aspects, but what it injects, the essence of what it injects is you can accept things by faith, and that I think is really bad.
Sorry
Thank
to
you.
stop
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you.
I didn't want to
Yeah,
go.
we need to go.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, sir.
Bueno, primero que nada, muchas gracias. Mi pregunta es, Gabriel Zanotti o cualquier.
Vamos, Gabriel.
¿Qué tanta coherencia hay en creer que existe lo que es el deísmo, alguien omnisapiente, omnipresente, que es prácticamente todo, y al mismo tiempo creer que existe un libre albedrío y una libertad para decidir?
Sí, es un problema muy viejo. Si Dios sabe todo, ¿cómo es que podemos ser libres? Pero es perfectamente compatible, ¿no es cierto? Es decir, nos ha creado seres libres y no hay, es decir, la omnipotencia divina jamás, o en general no la entendemos como incompatible con la real agencia de los entes naturales, incluido el ser humano. Es decir, que Dios sea omnipotente no significa que Dios hace todo en el sentido de lo que acá está sucediendo, lo está haciendo Dios. Yo estoy hablando y yo soy libre, no hay ningún problema con eso.
Okay, gracias.
Por favor. Yaron, be ready.
Question for Mr. Brook.
How did you know?
I have revelations.
Obviously.
If faith and reason are incompatible, and reason is the only way for a society to be successful, can you provide an example of a society that departed from Judeo-Christian values or the idea of a God to be broader and was successful?
Yes, in essence. Not in detail, but in essence, I think the United States of America was such a country. I think the whole point of the Declaration and the Constitution is to present a secular form of government. There's no accident that the First Amendment in the Constitution is a separation of church and state. It's to separate religion out of politics, out of the issue of statehood, of what a state means. And the Declaration of Independence that declares, yes, it has creed in there, you know, this is pre-Darwin. But it institutionalizes individual rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, that doesn't come from the Old or New Testament. It doesn't come from the Judeo-Christian tradition. There are no rights. The Amalek in the Old Testament didn't have any rights. The Jews who worship a golden calf didn't have any rights. They were slaughtered left and right, right? They were dealt with the way, you know, you dealt with in that period. So the whole conception of rights is a consequence of the application of reason to human existence, to what it takes to establish a human society in a free country. So I think the United States is a dominantly secular country, even though you could make the argument, obviously the people at the time were religious, but of course people have always been religious. You know.
Thank you, Yaron.
Right.
Thank you.
Next.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Iba a aquel lado de la mesa siendo hombres de
Vamos
economía.
a Gabriel, que recién zafó. Vamos,
Hombres
Gabriel.
Hombres de economía y al mismo tiempo hombres de fe. Cómo hay cierta incompatibilidad respecto al monopolio de la razón. O sea, en el politeísmo yo tengo mi Dios, otro tiene su Dios, y ciertamente no había conflicto. En cambio, en el monoteísmo, si yo tengo mi Dios y el tuyo es otro, y el mío es de verdad, el tuyo está equivocado, entonces hay un conflicto y la única forma es teniendo el monopolio de la razón. Como economistas y como hombres de fe, ¿cómo compatibilizan eso?
Well,
Podés contestar en español que ellos tienen.
Sí, no, el único modo de dialogar contigo y con todos acerca de Dios es precisamente el diálogo, que por definición rechaza la fuerza, porque la naturaleza de la verdad y la naturaleza de la inteligencia son totalmente contrarias a cualquier tipo de fuerza, incluso la fuerza lingüística. Por lo tanto, si alguien cree en Dios y trata de imponer eso por la fuerza, ni entiende qué es Dios, ni entiende qué es la verdad, ni entiende qué es la inteligencia humana, lo cual lamentablemente es muy frecuente.
Muchas gracias, señorita.
Good afternoon. Just a small rebuttal about authoritarianism linked to religion. In 1926, the Mexican government determined that religion was stagnating society, and so they tried to control Catholicism. and what happened in return, that there was religious persecution and thousands were slaughtered. In order to save your life, you had to say, "Death to Christ the King, and long live the federal government." So the United States has the First Amendment that requires religious freedom, and I think maybe both sides can respond on this. If it's beneficial instead to not combat religion, but to embrace freedom of thought, which also includes freedom of religion.
Well, I think we all embrace freedom of religion. It's a
your
question of
previous
what our
presentation, you said
evaluation of religion is. What I'm saying is, and I didn't say that all authoritarianism, it comes from religion. What I'm saying is that religion conditions one for authoritarianism. That is, that a culture that is religious is a culture that's accepted an authority above reason, and thus is open then to a variety of different authorities. It conditions you not to make decisions, and not to make decisions based on reason, based on facts, based on you. And that makes you susceptible to authoritarianism.
Thank
And
you.
Can I just say one
Of
very
course,
quick
please.
thing on that? So this is, in the Enlightenment, this is the view that is starting to emerge and emerges. So this is the way Locke puts it. And it's, again, it's not that every religious person is an authoritarian, but what the connection is. And he puts it as the person who doesn't demand arguments for himself to be convinced of things is not going to demand arguments when he deals with other people. And when you deal with other people, it's basically you deal with them through persuasion and force. And if you don't demand rational persuasion for yourself, when you interact with other people, why are you going to demand it when in interactions of other people? So he thought there's an intimate connection between the two, the use of faith and the use of force.
Señorita,
Bien, mi pregunta va en español y va para el profe Zanotti.
vamos, profe, a ver.
Dijo que la fe y la razón son compatibles porque existe diálogo, y creo que esto tranquilamente se podría interpretar como un proceso lógico donde, aunque ese razonamiento esté bien hecho, las premisas son falsas. Y según los objetivistas, o según lo que entendí en estos días, es que la razón es un medio para entender nuestro entorno, y supongo que no se podría utilizar para comprobar la existencia de Dios, siendo algo intangible. Por ende, la premisa de que Dios existe no se obtiene a través de la razón. ¿Aún así le parece este proceso lógico algo razonable?
Sí, porque en el caso de que me plantearan la verdad de mis premisas, yo trataría de argumentar lógicamente a favor de la verdad de esas premisas. En el caso de Dios, no tuve tiempo de decir que las famosas pruebas de la existencia de Dios en Santo Tomás no son argumentos para convencer a un no creyente. Era un debate interno que él estaba teniendo con San Anselmo del siglo XI. San Anselmo sostenía que Dios era evidente y Santo Tomás sostenía que no era evidente. Por eso desarrolló las famosas vías para la existencia de Dios, y tampoco tuve tiempo de decir que no es existencia en el sentido habitual. Dios no forma parte de un individuo que forma parte de una clase. Como decimos, por ejemplo, la clase de los elefantes. Existe al menos un X tal que X es elefante. Eso no se aplica a Dios. Entonces, habría muchas aclaraciones que hacer con respecto al tema de la existencia de Dios siguiendo Santo Tomás de Aquino, y estoy seguro que si tuviéramos tiempo, llegaríamos todos a muy interesantes conclusiones.
Gracias.
Exacto.
Adelante.
In her essay of Living Death, Rand has the thesis
Are
that...
you talking about Netflix or what?
No. Of Living Death, in her comments on the Catholic Church policies regarding sex.
Oh.
She has the thesis that the particular religious motivation is hatred of self-esteem, right, and of human sexual flourishing. I guess my question is there any validity in the argument that says that religious sexual commands are or were an attempt to promote sexually healthy or responsible lives? Or how can you explain the other consideration that Rand brings into consideration?
Just explain the essay, because they look puzzled.
Oh, so Ayn Rand wrote an essay on living death that was a commentary on the papal encyclical.
Which encyclical?
Humane Vitae.
Yeah, Humane Vitae.
Now I understand.
Okay.
So since nobody here, or very few people probably have read the essay, I'm going to make the wider point of the Christianity and its relationship to sex. And you can see this, for instance, in St. Augustine. But I think you see it with the Christianity in Rome and the battle and the collapse of Rome. It's a package deal of two things, but both things are operative. So the debauchery in the later part of the Roman Empire is real. And you can respond to that and think there's something wrong with it. But also, sex is an expression of selfishness, of self-interest, of experience yourself as an individual, as an end in myself. It's a pleasure that is experienced as worth experiencing for its own sake. It's not a means to procreation. In comparison to, I think, what happens in the Middle Ages, the attitude towards sex in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, if you put aside some of the debauchery, is way better than Christianity. And if you're trying to stamp out the kind of egoism that this expresses, and you want people to no longer be devoted to themselves, but to devote themselves and subordinate themselves to something higher, you have to attack the sexual experience. And you see, I think, massive attack on it in early Christianity when they're warring with the more secular Romans.
Thank you.
Adelante. Thank you, señorita.
Hello. I'll try to make my question in English.
It's going to be for them or for them?
Yeah, it's for them.
But you can comment.
Actually,
okay.
Well, I consider myself a rational person, so and I'm also a Catholic. So I investigate a lot about my religion, not because my parents told me to do, but I needed some answers. So my question for you is, do you recognize the validation of the Bible as an historical document, for example, an antique text? There's a lot of historical evidence for that to be correct historically, and that you cannot reproduce the things that happened at that time because you cannot scientifically reproduce the same situations. That's why the science cannot prove the same as it was in the past.
Understood. Let's go.
So
Yaron.
I mean, do I accept the Bible as an historical text? Partially. I'm sure a lot of it describes actual history of what was going on there, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, I read the Bible, I read the Old Testament, and it convinces me that if that's God, I don't want him. He's not a good guy. In the Old Testament, if you accept it as is, I've read every single chapter of the whole thing because that's what we studied in school. I grew up in Israel, and it's horrible. Judaism is a horrible religion as represented in the Old Testament. So whether it's all true in a sense of sequence of events, although I doubt parting the Red Sea and stuff like that is true, but to the extent that there's historical fact there, it doesn't matter. To me, it disproves the legitimacy and validity of what it's trying to reaffirm, because if I just think from a moral perspective of a human being, and I think most people who are religious haven't read the Old Testament, because if they had, I think they'd be horrified, and they wouldn't view it as a holy book. Because if you read a chapter and verse and you see how God treats people, and how God dishes out punishment and virtue and rewards and punishment, then it's filled with massive injustices and a real yearning for authoritarianism. And I became an atheist because when I was very young, this is the book we read, and I went, this isn't my world. I don't want to have anything to do with this. And it just didn't make any sense to me. It doesn't matter to me the extent to which it's historical.
Thank you, Yaron. Any comment on you?
I have the same problems with the Antique Testament. And yes, I have the same problems that you have. And the point was that later I had the certain Catholic interpretation of the Antique Testament that helps me to understand.
Yes.
But I had your own difficulties.
Very short.
Profesor, a ver, son libros que tienen las tradiciones del Antiguo Testamento, son de 500, 600, 800 años antes de Cristo, mezclan un poco la historia de un pueblo con una cosmovisión, con un modo de expresarse. Sería interesante responder a la tradición bimilenaria de ese pueblo para ver cómo ellos lo interpretan. Yo entiendo lo que pasa cuando uno lo lee de afuera, que no se puede desencajar, me parece, esos libros que se escriben en el contexto de un pueblo, de cómo ellos lo interpretan, ¿no?
Perfecto.
Si no, estaríamos diciendo que el judaísmo aconseja matar a los hijos y cosas por el estilo, cosa que no pasa, no es así.
Thank you. Nos quedó la última del superintelectual Zúñiga. Zúñiga, hacela sencilla y corta, que están todos queriendo salir.
Sí,
adelante.
Ya vamos a hacerla, ¿no? El detalle está en lo siguiente.
Hablar en el micrófono, no se escucha.
Sí. El problema serio tanto para el objetivismo como para el cristianismo es el nominalismo. Creo que la unidad dilemórfica, alma-cuerpo de Santo Tomás de Aquino es la fusión que en el aristotelismo decía entre las ciencias primeras, entre la ontología aristotélica, que es la pretendida ciencia universal, capaz de ocuparse de lo real, sin restricción alguna, y la teología. Esa es la unión ilemórfica del Santo Tomás de Aquino, que con todos los defectos es lo que Rand ya hablaba. ¿Qué ocurrió? Que el nominalismo hace trampa. Duns Scoto y Guillermo de Ockham se meten con la ontología aristotélica y dicen que ese ser contingente, que era lo real, los seres matemáticos y físicos, era el Dios cristiano infinito, o sea, sobrenatural. Y falsean, y de ahí viene la noción de que el ser necesario es Dios y nosotros somos los seres, una copia pálida, pues contingente eternamente. Eso lo hicieron y le da un poder enorme a ciertos grupos de personas, que es el poder político, y por lo cual vino el protestantismo posteriormente. Yo creo que hay que aclarar eso ahí, ¿no?
Y quedó aclarado y no voy a dejar contestar a nadie más porque tenemos el tiempo over, pero muchas gracias por la colaboración. Le pedimos un aplauso a todos. Thank you very much, guys. Great job.